A mentally disabled man died on death row. Joe Arridy asked for just an ice cream for his last meal. But before he took his final breath in the gas chamber, he tried telling the world that he was innocent. It was a message not received until decades later. But what was that message? And what was Joe really trying to tell us? Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you for joining today. And I need to let you know that there is a 10-Minute Murder merchandise store. I forget about it pretty often, and I only am reminded when someone makes a purchase and I get an email that says, hey, you've made a sale on, the website. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've got a merchandise store that I literally never talk about. I mean, I've talked about it in the past, but not in a long time. And this is me making an attempt to talk about it. I feel weird about it because I do make a little bit of money. It's very, very little money, by the way. A percentage of that money that you spend on buying shirts and stickers, it goes to me, but it's so small that it's almost not even worth mentioning. So if you're trying to support the show by buying a shirt or something, thinking, well, Joe will get this money and Joe will do whatever he does to, help the show. Don't do that. If you want to buy a shirt because you would like a 10-Minute Murder shirt, then perfect. That's exactly what the merchandise store is for. But if you really want to support the show, spend zero money and just tell some people that you know about the podcast. But again, the merchandise store is there if you'd like to go to it. 10minutemurder.com. There's a merchandise link somewhere in there. All right, before we get into the story today, this is your reminder to subscribe. If you are a new listener here and have not yet subscribed, wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you hit the subscribe button there, and you will never miss another future episode of 10-Minute Murder. On Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, 10-Minute Murder is there. Links are in the show notes of this episode, or you can go to 10minutemurder.com. Now, to today's story. The IQ of the average person walking around in the United States is 100. Joe Arridy was a man with an IQ of 46 when he was 23 years old. Joe was tried and convicted of a brutal murder and sentenced to death in the 1930s. But as the years passed, many started questioning the validity of his confession and the evidence used to convict him. Was Joe genuinely guilty of the crime he was accused of, or was he just a pawn in a giant game of corruption and manipulation? And who really is Joe Arridy? He was born in 1915 in Pueblo, Colorado, to Mary and Henry Arridy, who were recent immigrants from Syria, which was at the time called the Ottoman Empire. Mary and Henry were a very young couple, new to the country, and were looking for work. And unfortunately, they didn't speak very much English. And for the first 5 years of young Joe's life, they weren't really sure if he was going to excel at English either. And that's because he didn't utter a word to literally anyone. Joe didn't speak for the first 5 years. He went to 1 year at an elementary school, and the principal called Arridy's parents to the school and gave him back and said he can't learn here. At age 10, Joe was accepted into the State Home and Training School for Mental Defects in Grand Junction, Colorado, where he intermittently resided until he was a teenager. He was frequently bullied and physically assaulted by his classmates in his community and at his school. When Joe had had enough of the bullies, he quit school and boarded freight trains out of the city. By the end of August 1936, he was 21 years old and living in the rail yards of Cheyenne, Wyoming. On August 26, 1936, Joe Arridy was detained in Cheyenne, Wyoming for vagrancy after being discovered wandering the rail yards. Many people considered that this arrest was erroneous. George Carroll, the county sheriff at that time, was aware of the extensive hunt for potential murderers in the Drain case. And I know what you're asking. What the heck is the Drain case? Well, on August 14, 1936, 2 girls of the Drain family were attacked while sleeping in their home in Pueblo, Colorado. Both 15-year-old Dorothy and her 12-year-old sister, Barbara Drain, were bludgeoned by an intruder with what was believed to be a hatchet. Dorothy was also raped. She died from the hatchet attack, while Barbara survived. And that quick synopsis of the Drain case comes from Wikipedia. Sheriff George Carroll started investigating Joe Arridy about the drain case when Joe admitted to him while being questioned that he had taken a train through Pueblo after leaving Grand Junction, Colorado. Carroll found that Frank Aguilar, who was the primary suspect and a Mexican laborer, had already been taken into custody when he spoke with Pueblo police about Arridy. Aguilar had worked for the drain girl's father and was fired shortly before the attack. And Frank Aguilar had left work before the incident occurred, but an axe head was recovered from his home. Sheriff Carroll claims that he arrested Joe after Joe told him several times that he had been at the crime scene with a man named Frank. After Aguilar was arrested, he confessed to the crime and told police that he had never met and had never seen Joe Arridy. Aguilar was also convicted of the rape and murder of Dorothy Drain and sentenced to death. In 1937, Frank Aguilar was executed. Now we have Joe Arridy left in police custody. He was transported to Pueblo, where he confessed again. When the case was finally taken to trial, Arridy's lawyer pleaded insanity to spare his client's life. But Joe Arridy was ruled to be sane while acknowledged by 3 state psychiatrists to be so mentally limited as to be classified as an, quote, imbecile. The reports said that he had an IQ at that time of 46 and the mind of a 6-year-old boy. They observed that Joe couldn't really discriminate between right and wrong. As a result, could not carry out any act with criminal intent. However, Joe Arridy was found guilty, mostly due to his confessions. And as I'm sure you know, since then, we've come a long way as it relates to research into mental defects, and police interrogation techniques have been changed quite a lot since this happened. Research has demonstrated that people with impaired mental capacity are much more susceptible to coercion during questioning and are more likely to give false confessions. So if you ignore Joe Arridy's confession, what do they have? There is no tangible proof of Joe Arridy committing this murder. According to Barbara Drain's testimony, Frank Aguilar, not Arridy, was present at the attack. She recognized Frank since he had been previously employed by her father. After Joe Arridy's conviction and sentencing, attorney Gail Ireland, who also went on to serve as Colorado's Attorney General, was appointed as his defense attorney. Ireland succeeded in postponing his execution, but could not get his conviction reversed or have his sentence commuted. He cited the testimony of medical professionals about Joe's mental impairments and Aguilar's claim that he acted alone. Ireland then said that Arridy could not even understand what execution meant. He further urged the court to believe him about the innocence of Joe and argued to the Supreme Court of Colorado. Joe received 9 stays of execution as appeals and petitions on his behalf were mounted. While held on death row during the appeals process, prison warden Roy Best gave Arridy a toy train, which he often played with. According to the warden, he believed that Joe was the happiest prisoner on death row. He was well respected and treated well by both guards and inmates. The warden appeared to be on Joe's side, even helping in the campaign to spare his life. Roy Best always felt sorry for him while he was in jail, since all he seemed to do was play cheerfully with that toy train, perhaps unaware that he was destined to die. For his final meal, Joe asked for ice cream, and when someone asked him about being put to death, he displayed blank surprise. He didn't understand the meaning of the gas chamber, telling the warden, No, Joe won't die." Joe had yet to finish the ice cream that he requested before being taken away to the chamber. He left the ice cream and asked for it to be refrigerated so that he could eat it later, without understanding that he was to be executed soon and would never return. He smiled as he was taken to that gas chamber. Momentarily nervous, he calmed down when the warden grabbed his hand and reassured him. None of Joe Arridy's family was there during the execution. Roy Best, who was best friend to Arridy, was crying during the execution. And slowly, that was the end. Research into guaranteeing fair interrogations and confessions led to renewed interest in a number of cases, including Arridy's. Joe was given a pardon, posthumously obviously, by Colorado Governor Bill Ritter in 2011, more than 7 decades after his execution. Obviously, pardoning Joe can't undo this tragic event in Colorado history. However, it is in the interest of justice and simple decency to restore Joe Arridy's name.